Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse, coming to you from the beautiful countryside of Ohio, where we still have good gun laws, thank goodness. So the Biden administration suffered a major defeat in its attempt to hand over our sovereignty to the World Health Organization under the guise of public health. So while this is a massive win for we the people, it also revealed an intense power struggle for world dominance between the deep state, as we know them, and the Chinese Communist Party. So I'm going to examine all this and more on today's show. So folks, if you are not following me on social media, make sure you are. I'm most active on Truth Social and Telegram. Both places you can find me at Man in America. And if you want a full list of all the links to where you can find both my social media accounts and the podcast links, so whether it's Spotify or iHeart, etc., those are all going to be in the description below the video. So make sure you're following me on those accounts. And also, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, please go watch me on Rumble. Look, the only reason I'm still coming on to Facebook and YouTube is because you're still here and I got to reach you. If all of you came over to Rumble, a company that supports free speech and allows me to talk about things that I can't talk about on YouTube and Facebook, then we can stop going there and maybe those companies would collapse and they wouldn't be helping push forward the Great Reset. Just a novel concept for you. And look, folks, as you'll see on today's show, I believe we have some shaky times ahead of us. They're kind of already here. The dollar is, I believe, to be nearing collapse, which is one of the main objectives of the CCP, as you'll see in today's show. A lot of folks are looking for ways to protect their wealth, and I've always been one to recommend physical gold and silver. And for this, I'm confident recommending Noble Gold. You can buy gold and silver directly, or you can do an IRA transfer. Look, if your savings, your retirement, if it's sitting in an IRA, it's tied to the US dollar. That's a very risky place for it to be, in my opinion. Look, I'm not a financial expert. Just keep that in mind. I'm Man in America. That's who I am. So do your own research, but I'm just telling you what I believe and how I treat my own money. So if you have your money, you might want to consider at least putting part of it into gold or silver. And whether you use Noble Gold or another company, doesn't matter. I can tell you I've vetted Noble Gold, and they have a process of allowing you to move your money from an IRA into physical gold or silver that you own. You can actually go touch it. It's yours. But they do that while allowing you to avoid the taxes and penalties that are always associated with moving your money out of your IRA. So if you want to learn more about that, open up a new tab right now and go to www.goldwithseth.com. That's goldwithseth.com, or call 877-646-5347 to speak to someone right now. Again, it's 877-646-5347. So folks, this show today is brought to you by Rise TV, and I actually have a very exciting announcement for you. Tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, we are premiering, and we're going to do a watch party, the first episode of Deep Insight with Man in America. So if you remember The Plot to Steal America, it was this really cool produced show. So we're now producing a series over on Rise TV. So I'll go ahead and just, instead of talking up, I'm going to play the trailer for you. So watch this trailer. This is for our first episode of Deep Insight. It's about a minute trailer. So check this out right now.
How are the Ukrainian oil pipelines, Klaus Schwab's Great Reset, and the so-called New World Order agenda connected? Why did Russia invade Ukraine? Why are megacorporations even interested in Ukraine? What has George Soros been doing in Ukraine since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991? And why did Hunter Biden get paid $50,000 a month to sit on the board of Burisma Holdings, a Ukrainian energy company? These are just some of the questions you probably wondered about. Ukraine, gas companies, energy, power. This is just the tip of a very large iceberg. All of this and more on Rise TV's newest series, Deep Insight, with Man in America.
All right, so folks, that we are going to premiere that episode tonight at 9 p.m. on Rise TV. I'll be watching it live with you. If you want to join with us, there is a free trial in the description below. You can come over, create an account. You can watch that full episode. It's one of, we have some great ones. We're going to be covering inflation. We're doing a deep dive episode into BlackRock and Vanguard. So there's some great stuff. So if you want to join us tonight, again, it's at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Rise TV. So, all right, folks, getting on to today's show, we have some very, very, very good news. I swear, it feels like it's just bad news after bad news. It's more lockdowns and monkeypox and famine and the collapse of the dollar. That seems to be our reality. It's like, oh, well, at least we have Durham. Not, right? We got the Sussman being, let off the hook. Which is a big disappointment. But thankfully, I think actually one of the most important things, maybe more important than a Sussman trial even, is the fact that the amendments that the Biden administration submitted to the World Health Organization, which were going to be voted on this past week, failed to pass. And so we're going to dig into that, what that means, what they are trying to accomplish. But I noticed some things when researching why it didn't pass that points to a much bigger discussion. And that discussion is the global vying for power. Because I believe, and as I'm going to get into in today's show, that it's not just a lot of people that they want to simplify things, right? It's just, it's the deep state. Well, the deep state and the cabal, they're trying to do this, and it's the Great Reset, and the CCP, they're just a lapdog for the deep state. No. In my understanding, I believe that there are multiple factions, right? And the two biggest factions, I believe, are the CCP and their cohorts, and then the deep state as we know it, which is, I'll get into what I believe when I say deep state. What does that mean, right? Well, it's the U.S. government, the corporatocracy that kind of stems from the U.S., which has used the U.S. dollar and the unlimited printing of the U.S. dollar to fund its criminal activities, its wars around the world. And that's coming to a harsh end, I believe, because as I'm going to get into today, the nations are going to be teaming up against the United States, and the United States, I believe, will be losing its petrodollar status, and the U.S. dollar will no longer be the reserve currency. But before I get into that, I'm going to jump into James Roguski's article about how we won. Now, if you don't know James, I interviewed him before they voted on this, and we talked about kind of sounding the alarm about what was going to be happening at the World Health Organization. So let me go ahead and pull up James's article here, and this will give you an overview of what happened. And Patriots, you should feel good about this. This is a significant win because basically what was happening was the Biden administration, through the delegates to the World Health Organization, had made a series of amendments that were going to be going into, I think it's like their treaty, a pandemic treaty. It was part of it and other things. But basically what it would have done, if these amendments would have been written into their policy, or it's not really a law, it would have given them control over us. So basically imagine this. Imagine there is a new outbreak. Say it's a penguin pox, right? The monkey pox loses its appeal. People no longer are scared of it. Oh my goodness, someone slept with a penguin in Antarctica, and now we've got penguin pox, right? That's how the monkey stuff comes about, right? What this would have done is it would have allowed the World Health Organization to say this is they would have called it a crisis. I forget, there's a certain term they would have used. And they would have been able to, under the guise of public health, implement lockdowns, vaccine requirements, mask requirements. So imagine that. Imagine you live in Texas. Now, granted, I bet a lot of sheriffs people would not comply, right? Thanks to our Second Amendment and everything else, but Constitution. Imagine you live in Texas or really anywhere, and the World Health Organization says, well, Ohio now has to go under a lockdown. Texas has to go under a lockdown. This is what the Biden administration was working on doing, was handing over our sovereignty to the World Health Organization. And people were frightened about this. And thanks to people like James Roguski, who's an investigative journalist and a researcher who started really sounding the alarm about this, and people all over were talking about this. It even got up to Tucker Carlson, where you have it being covered on primetime Fox News. So everyone started knowing about this, which is significant because this is the power of we the people. So let me go ahead and bring up the James's article here. So here we go. This is James Roguski. He's the person that's been really great researching and exposing this. And so here he says the Biden administration suffered an absolutely stunning defeat in their attempt to amend the international health regulations against the will of we the people. And I love this little meme here, right? The power of the people is stronger than the people in power. Always remember that, folks. That is absolutely, absolutely important to always remember. So back to his article, though. Here's what he says. Of course, he's saying you will not hear about this on mainstream media, which is true, except Tucker gave it a little shout out. So just to give a brief summary of what happened. So spectacular news came out of Geneva, coming out of Geneva, points to a complete and total victory for those who opposed the amendments to the international health regulations proposed by the Biden administration. So it's kind of interesting how of all the countries in the world, and all the countries that are part of the World Health Organization or participate, it was the Biden administration that proposed these amendments that would have affected all these other countries. It's kind of insane to think about. So back to his article. Official delegates from wealthy developed nations like Australia, the UK, the European Union, and the United States spoke in strong support of the amendments and urged other states to join them in signing away their country's sovereignty. The first sign, however, that things might not be going the globalist way came when Botswana stated they would be collectively withholding their support for the reforms, which many African members were very concerned about. Multiple other countries also said they had reservations over the changes and would not be supporting them either. These included Brazil, Brunei, Namibia, Bangladesh, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and Iran. Brazil, in particular, said it would exit the WHO altogether rather than allow its population to be made subject to the new amendments. In the end, the WHO and its wealthy nation supporters were forced to back down. So let's unpack this a little bit. Let's unpack this. Here you have the WHO, the World Health Organization. I'll pull this article back up in a second here, which from our perception is at the tip of the spear of the Great Reset, right? They're using the excuse of public health to impose a medical tyranny, a medical technocracy globally, right? So they're using that. And we also saw, and I dug heavily into this, there's an author named Michael Sanger who wrote a book called Snake Oil. I think it's How Xi Jinping Locked Down the World, specifically about how Xi Jinping, using the WHO, was able to orchestrate lockdowns around the world. So a lot of us, we would have looked at the WHO and thought, okay, this is the tip of the kind of New World Order spear to take away the rights of people around the world and bring in a one world government. So you would think that a lot of these nations, that China, for instance, Australia, right? You would think they'd be on the same page. You would especially think that China, given what I thought was a very strong control over the World Health Organization in order to bring about what we saw happen with COVID, you would think that they would be in full support of this, right? Like, and this is what really got me thinking. Because if China used the WHO to implement lockdowns around the world, which I did a whole video on that, and there's a book, the one I mentioned by Michael Sanger, you can read as well. If China did that, why would China not support the WHO gaining sovereignty over, especially of all countries, but especially over the U.S. citizens? The U.S. citizens are the greatest threat to the New World Order, and specifically because we have the Second Amendment. We are the world's largest standing army. So I would imagine, and they've already been talking about this, talking about gun rights as being a public health crisis. I would imagine that would be part of their plan. We'll be using the World Health Organization to somehow bypass the Second Amendment and remove the guns from the hands of Americans that have been taught since 1776 that we are given this Second Amendment to protect ourselves from tyranny using the guns that we are granted, the rights to. So let's go ahead and kind of circle back around, though, to why would China not support that? Well, and that got me kind of searching because there's a much greater divide that's happening here. So I'm going to play a quick video for you. And this video is talking about the gas pipelines and gas to Europe, the Ukraine Russia sanctions, China, India. It's only about 1 minute video, but just check this out. It's very revealing if you're trying to understand what's happening right now. I'm going to play this for you.
I want to be clear what's happening with the EU and oil.
Yeah.
Basically, what they're saying is we're going to ban most oil comes in via supertanker. They're going to ban Russian oil from coming into the EU via ship. Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic said, because they don't have ports, so they have to get it all by pipeline, right? And they said, we can't do it. So the deal basically says Russian oil can still come in to those three nations via pipeline. The rest of Europe will wean itself off the pipeline. But here's the thing, and the price of oil is up. It's probably more China opening than this that's moving oil, because India has been buying up all the Russian crude they can. And there's no indication they're going to stop. So it's unlikely this will hit Russian sales of crude too much globally. It'll hit EU sales. But I think India and probably China are going to pick up any slack.
So what he's telling us is that the EU is moving to ban Russian oil, right? They had to say 90% of Russian oil. This is the EU. We also saw, going back to James's article, because I'm going to keep referencing this because there's a lot in here for us to understand. We also saw in James's article that it was the Australia. So look at the second paragraph. It was Australia, the UK, the EU, and the United States that were strongly in support of this. Okay, so here we have this body in support of the stripping of sovereignty of these people. Yet we have opposing that, we have, as is listed, Brazil, Brunei, some African countries, Bangladesh, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and Iran. So again, what the guy mentioned in the video is that you have the US and you have the EU specifically putting massive sanctions, right, banning the sale of Russian oil. Yet you have India and China stepping to aid Russia with this. So you're seeing a divide here. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with what is called the BRICS nations, okay? So I'm going to pull this next article for you. But the BRICS nation, it's Brazil, Russia, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Sorry, BRICS. What we're seeing is that we're seeing these countries specifically as the U.S. imposes more sanctions on Russia and does more of its shenanigans all over the world. You're seeing these BRICS nations pull together. And again, if you look at the nations that oppose the WHO treaty, it was primarily the BRICS nations. Now, I believe at the head of the BRICS nations, we have China. China, long history of aiming for dominance, going back to the Three Kingdoms. I mean, it is in their blood, right? And even, kind of fast forwarding up to the modern day Chinese Communist Party, they've openly stated that their goal is a global communist system. They've openly stated it, that their goal is to free the world of capitalism using their communist ideologies, their communist way of governance. So do you think that the Chinese are going to be, especially the CCP, will be submitting to the European Union or bowing down to the European bankers? I don't think so. Okay, so let's go look at that. There's another article. This is actually a long paper that was published. This was on, I think it was Cambridge University published this, and this is very, very significant. So let me pull this up for you. And this was this article, paper published. Can BRICS de-dollarize the global financial system? Now, this came out, this paper, which was probably a long-term bit of research, right? It's almost a book. This came out in February of this year. So this is before we really kind of got, kind of pushed into the sanctions, what's happening with Ukraine, all this. This is at the very kind of beginning of this happening. So, but this is really, really important because, and I'll step into this in the next step, talk about currency wars and the role that they play. But let me just read a few things from this because this is really important. Again, this is from Cambridge University. Now, what's interesting to note is that the author There's an author and a co-author. It's Zhongyuan Zhou Liu and Mihaly Papa. So Mihaly Papa did a little bit of research, and this author has written about some Indian type information. But Zhongyuan Zhou Liu is a female who's actually part of the Council of Foreign Relations, interestingly enough, but covers a lot and has a lot of ties to China and is Chinese, which makes me think that this is, we know that a lot of these students and a lot of the researchers and even scientists are coming from China, and they're coming. I'm not accusing this person directly. I'm just painting the picture that a lot of times they're coming over to the United States to infiltrate into our colleges and spread the message of the Chinese Communist Party. So anyway, let's look at this article is saying, this paper is saying, this is very important. So existing scholarship has not systematically examined BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, as a rising power de-dollarization coalition, despite the group developing multiple de-dollarization initiatives to reduce currency risk and bypass U.S. sanctions. So scroll down, that the BRICS coalitional. So the BRICS coalitional de-dollarization initiatives have established critical infrastructure for a prospective alternative an alternative non-dollar global financial system. Okay, let me scroll down to the next point here. So here they're saying in this, the US dollar is the dominant currency in the global financial and monetary system and affects various aspects of global affairs. As such, the dollar's power and prestige have been central to American global leadership. So I'm not going to be digging into that too deeply into this. This is a long paper, and I'm still working on reading through it, but I want to pull up this next article. This is from Seeking Alpha. It's a financial trading website, talking about how a petro yuan would be a blow for the dollar. So this is back in March, and the Wall Street Journal broke an article about how China was in discussion with Saudi Arabia to create a petro yuan, basically to allow the trade of oil through the yuan. Because right now, a lot of the value of our US dollar comes from it being the petrodollar, meaning that oil, which is a commodity that needs to be traded by countries all over the world. Oil is, I don't know how to tell you how important oil is, but there are agreements that the United States made specifically with nations like Saudi Arabia as part of the imperialization of the world by the United States and its corporatocracy, its big oil company. That's a whole different thing. But the agreement was that oil would be traded in US dollar. And so that forces nations to actually hold on to the US dollar, which actually gives the US dollar a lot of its value. You see, the US dollar is no longer backed by gold. And since they have done that, and since the creation of the Federal Reserve, and especially since removing the backing of gold from the US dollar, it's allowed the Federal Reserve to basically print unlimited money. But what happens when you print unlimited money? Well, eventually that castle crumbles. And this is what we're seeing happen here. So let me read a few points from this, because this is highlighting a very specific example of how China is deliberately coming after the US dollar. So in this article, the summary says, in another blow for dollar dominance, Saudi Arabia is reportedly considering pricing at least some of its Chinese oil sales in yuan. The petrodollar serves as a crucial support for the US dollar. The majority of global oil sales are priced in dollars. This ensures constant demand for the greenback. Yuan-based oil contracts would be a boon for China. The Chinese would love to limit their exposure to the dollar. So, folks, this is very, very important, because getting back to these two factions, as I was talking about earlier, and the W.H.O, the voting on this, and the nations that were supporting against it really, really shows where this divide is at. So if you want to understand the deep state, if you want to understand who they are, how they operate, one of the best books I can recommend that you read is called The Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And it's a book that was written by a person that was literally what you'd call an economic hitman. So this is how the U.S. worked together with the World Bank and organizations like USAID to go in. So this guy was an economic hitman. So he would go into a country like Ecuador, and his job was to convince the president of that country to take on massive loans from the World Bank and US Aid and other organizations to develop infrastructure for their companies. So he would go into these countries, like Ecuador, for instance, and say, look, you've got so many untapped resources. Here's how, if you take on these loans with us, we're going to develop a new power grid for you. We're going to develop all this stuff to help your country. And we're going to increase your GDP by 15% over the next year and a half, or whatever he would tell them. He knew he was lying, because what it was a debt trap. Okay. And this was happening in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even happening still now. And so this is one of the ways that the globalists were creating debt slaves. And so this was the way that America, and so when I say America, I'm not referring to the American people. I'm talking about the government and the corporations of America. Because now, earlier I talked about the deep state. So, well, who is the deep state? Well, as I've researched further and further, I understand the deep state to be, when I refer to it, not China. China is different, and I'll get into that. But the European bankers, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers over here in America, a lot of these families that control the banking systems, they control the Federal Reserve. But America, the corporations in the government of America have been used as a major, major tool of the deep state for them to gain a global dominance. And so we might look at certain countries like Ecuador, for instance, or Peru, various countries, and think that, oh, they're independent countries. But actually, so many of these countries have sold themselves off to, basically, they're now in a lot of ways owned by the corporatocracy. They have, because how this would work with the economic hitman is he goes in there and says, look, we're going to promise you 10% increase in GDP or whatever, and you're going to take this massive loan to develop the infrastructure. But they would know that the people that were selling it, he would know that the project would not work. He knew it, absolutely knew it would not work. So what would happen, though, is that when that failed to work, they would, in that process, negotiate what would happen. So if that didn't work, so the country would then have to pledge its own oil as collateral or rainforest land as collateral. And so this would enable the U.S. government work in conjunction with these giant corporations, and a lot of this stuff backed by European bankers. It would enable them to basically seize control over countries. Now, what's crazy in this book, he talked about if he went in there, it was really important the president was corruptible, because at a certain point, the president or the leader of that country would actually see that what they were going to do would not help their people, but they would set up so that the leader of that country would get massive amounts of bribes and kickbacks. So how do you think people like Zelensky in Ukraine are worth over $1 billion? Well, because they get giant kickbacks through basically selling off their country and their people to the globalists. And so this system was very effective. Now, what was insane about it, he describes this in the book, is if the economic hitman was not able to convince the world leader, the president or et cetera, if he was not able to convince them to sign on with this agreement and become part of this massive globalist system, he said next they would send in the CIA jackals. He literally says this in the book. He would say if the president did not agree to sign up, whether, say the president saw through the scam or the president was not corruptible or combination, then they would send in the CIA jackals that would assassinate the president. He lists multiple countries in his books of actual leaders. I think it was the president of Panama, the president of Ecuador, which are two that he named, that were assassinated by the CIA. And then they would put in someone in power that would listen to them. And so the United States, for a very long time, we're not just the United States, our government, the military industrial complex, the actual military, which was fighting Bush's wars, is all oil. We know there's no weapons of mass destruction. The United States has been pushing for a global imperialism, and these other countries know it. China knows it. So they see that. They see that United States as a tool of the globalists is pushing forward and encroaching on and working towards that one world system. So we think of the New World Order would be coming out of the EU, and the EU is it's weak compared to what the US's capabilities would be and what they are. And so you'd have these other countries like Russia, for instance, that didn't want to put up with that. So even if you look at Russia and Ukraine, in a lot of ways, it's a proxy war for America defending our assets in Ukraine up against Russia, right? Same thing, similar things happen with China. But don't think for a second, though, that because China is opposing a new world order that they're the good guys. They're not, because they want control. They want that system for themselves. And so what you see happening here is that as we're talking about what I showed you, how the BRICS nations are coming together to de-dollarize, what they're working on doing is forming what you call a basket of currency. They're working on basically removing the U.S.'s petrodollar status and the world reserve status. This is what they are actively doing, and what I believe they will be successful in doing. And so I believe that over the next 6 to 24 months or so, that we will see a collapse of the dollar. Our enemies are actively working towards this. Not to mention, the globalists have been using the Federal Reserve and that reserve status to print unlimited money to wage their wars around the world, to fund the military-industrial complex, to do all these illegal things to seize control because they want that global dominance. And it's like if you're in Monopoly and you're the banker and you control that money, imagine if you as the banker could buy up Park Avenue and buy up all the railroads and buy up all the hotels. That's kind of what they've done. They've used the U.S. dollar and its petrodollar status, and its status as the world reserve currency, which gives it actually value. They've used that to fund their entire deep state operation. How do you think we've funded these biolabs all over the world? How have we funded all these wars, right? We just keep printing and printing and printing. That's going to come to an end, though, because what happens when the U.S. loses that reserve status, the petrodollar status? The dollar collapses. Nobody wants it anymore. It's not backed by gold. You see, Putin was very smart. Putin, one of the first things he did after all these sanctions is he actually backed the ruble with gold. Or I think it is somewhere around, I think it's 5,000 rubles is equivalent to 1 gram of gold. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. That's going to further devalue the U.S. dollar. So again, this is why you hear me in the beginning. I talk about moving your money into gold and silver and out of U.S. dollar assets like the stock market, et cetera. I'm not joking. Like, this is a serious thing, because if and when the U.S. dollar collapses, if I have, say, $10,000 sitting in my checking account, right, that might be wiped out over the course of a couple of weeks. But if I had $10,000 in gold or silver, I could be much more protected and insulated. In fact, I might see that gold or silver go up significantly because the value of the dollar drops to almost nothing. This is what these nations are aiming towards. Okay, so this is very, very significant. So if you're looking, again, back to the bigger picture of what's happening, and if you saw my interview with Jeff Nyquist this past week, China, in a lot of ways, is gearing up for World War III. China has been attacking America for a very, very, very long time. They refer to it as unrestricted warfare, right? Anything goes. So they have been trying to avoid a direct military kinetic confrontation. Instead, they've been stealing our intellectual property. They've been stealing our jobs. They've been doing a million things to help try to destroy America. Okay, so what we're seeing form here, though, is we're seeing two systems. We have the deep state that I talked about, and we have these BRICS nations, what I believe that CCP is at the head of, and this is a battle between the two of them. Now, if you remember when Trump was in office and Trump was working with Putin, it seemed very closely, even Kim Jong-un, I believe that what Trump was doing was Trump was trying to organize these nations, right, that are now the BRICS nations. Trump was very close with Modi in India. So I think Trump was trying to take this second faction and work together with them to bring down what we know as the deep state. Now, because they were able to remove Trump from office, and I believe Trump is still trying to fight in ways that he can, but fundamentally, they've got their guy in place. So with that, though, I think that represented a significant shift in the global chessboard of what's happening. And so now we're back to these two factions. And I'm sorry to break it to you, but no one is looking out for the American people. I believe Trump is. But between these two factions, no one's looking out for the American people, which is why a lot of people are saying, oh, is Xi Jinping working with Putin to bring down the deep state? Well, you could say yes, But you can't say that the enemy of your enemy is your friend, because go look at China. China's goal is global dominance. Their goal is for United States to be in a communist system. They want people like me in a labor camp somewhere. I promise you, if China had control over America, I would be in some sort of labor camp somewhere, if I was even still alive, right? So that's what they want. It's not like China is going to bring down the deep state and be like, oh, America, you're free. Like, we love your patriotism. No, it's actually our government that has been one of the biggest enemies of nations like China and Russia, right? Not that our government is bad and they're good, but a lot of them, they're all bad, right? Now, I believe, as I mentioned on Telegram, I do believe that amidst this battle playing out between the deep state and the BRICS nations and the CCP, I believe that will lead to the destruction of both of them, right? Like, the worst thing you can do is, if you see your enemy in a fight with your other enemy, is try to stop them. I do believe that they will end up killing themselves, okay? Now, let's look at, I have some other signs of this instability, and I've shown these before, but I'm going to dig back into this. So let's take a look at, let me pull this up right here to show that there is this division between these factions. So here we have, this was back in 2021. Not sure if you remember seeing this, but China had officially declared George Soros a global terrorist. They called him the son of Satan. I'm not making this stuff up, right? So let me read a little bit here for you. So China has officially declared far-left billionaire George Soros as a global terrorist. So the Chinese Communist Party made the announcement in China's government-controlled state media, where it labeled Soros as, quote, the son of Satan. The CCP is accusing Soros of funding anti-China propaganda while attempting to usher in his global agenda. An article published in the CCP mouthpiece, The Global Times, accuses Soros of funding Hong Kong's jailed newspaper owner and publisher Jimmy Lai. It alleges that Soros is funding Lai to promote anti-Beijing protests, most notably the 2019 demonstrations. The article, titled "This Global Economic Terrorist is Staring at China," claims that Soros and his Open Society foundations financed Human Rights Watch and are running, and Open Foundations financed Human Rights Watch are running a campaign to spread rumors against China. Okay, so this wasn't just coming from China towards Soros. Soros has been very outspoken about the risk of Xi Jinping. Now you say, why are you talking about Soros, Seth? Why, George Soros, yeah, we know he's rich and he's active in this, but I believe that Soros is one of the public figures of the deep state. He's one of the ones that's coming out and speaking on behalf of them. He's one of their mouthpieces. So when Soros comes out, like I'm saying in here, when Soros comes out and calls Xi Jinping the greatest threat to open society that open societies face today, we have to pay attention to this. So this is earlier this year. This is back in February. So Soros says that China will use the Olympics to score propaganda victory for its system of strict controls. So Soros, who is, as we know, was very involved in the election and is pushing forward so many ultra left-wing initiatives. I mean, he's funding BLM. We know that he's doing that. We know that Soros is pointing us towards a one world system. He's up there with Bill Gates and Klaus Schwab, the Clintons, Obama. They're all working together to push us towards a one world system. Now, a couple of years ago, maybe you thought, well, China is also part of that one world system. But actually, if you think about it, China's not going to be bowing down to them. And here you can see that there is deep infighting. And going back to the World Health Organization voting, which took place on the amendments this past couple of days, you can see that this infighting is becoming more and more apparent, that there is a division between these two factions. Now, back to this article on Fox about Soros. So, listen to this. Billionaire George Soros on Monday warned that Chinese President Xi Jinping is, quote, the greatest threat that open societies face today, end quote, and said that the rise of big tech companies have sharpened the conflict between China and the United States. So keep in mind, when Soros is talking about China and the United States, he's not talking about like us, the people of the United States. He's talking about the United States as an arm of the globalists, as an arm of the deep state, right? It's not about, you and I. It's about the U.S. as, the Biden administration, et cetera. So when he's saying that it's sharpening the conflict between China and the U.S., the deep state sees China as a threat. So Soros, a Hungarian-American mega donor known for his backing of liberal causes and illegal causes and politicians, made remarks at the opening of a Hoover Institution panel on Monday evening beginning by dubbing 2022 as a critical year in the history of the world. That's true. But what he says, in a few days, China, the world's most powerful authoritarian state, will begin hosting the Winter Olympics. And like Germany in 1936, it will attempt to use the spectacle to score propaganda victory for its system of strict controls, Soros said. We are at or close to important decisions that will determine the direction in which the world is going. So as you can see here, there is a division. Now, earlier I was explaining about, through the book, The Confessions of an Economic Hitman, how the U.S. and our corporations, which are, by and large controlled by Vanguard and BlackRock. BlackRock, which is I think the majority shareholder of BlackRock is Vanguard. Vanguard, which I'm doing a deep dive episode into this. Actually, I'm working on the script right now. It's going to be one of our Deep Insight with Man in America episodes on Rise TV. But it's going to be really looking into how Vanguard and BlackRock basically run the corporations of the world and how these corporations run the world. Okay, so, but you can see, though, this division. So as I was talking about with the Confessions of an Economic Hitman, that they've used the corporatocracy to seize control over countries. We look at nations and have these individual nation states. They're very blurred, actually. It's like if you're looking at a chessboard. The U.S. government has already taken so many of the global pawns and they've moved them under their control. So the U.S. government has much more power than just the United States. We're running countries all over the world using our color revolution, CIA input, governance. We've done, Ukraine was a perfect example of that. The U.S. government has overthrown so many elections, has overthrown so many governments, and put our people in charge. Right. So, but what's interesting though is a lot of people, they say, oh, well, the CCP was created by the deep state, which is true. Actually, if you go back and you look at the origins of the CCP and Mao Zedong specifically, it was Yale in China that got him off his feet. You had, I think it was David Rockefeller openly praising what Mao was doing in China at that time. But I truly believe, and this is the best way I can put it, is that the CCP is Frankenstein's monster. The globalist, the deep state, created the Chinese Communist Party and for a lot of reasons. One is just to test a communist system because that's what they wanted to do. But they also needed it. It was very useful for them. It was also very useful to have the communist boogeyman to justify building up the American military industrial complex, et cetera. So, but the China, though, has grown to be much greater of a power, and they're much larger of a threat to the deep state than they ever could have imagined. And so if you really want to study how the deep state has gained control of these countries, a lot of that can be found in Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Now, China, it's interesting because China, with their Belt and Road Initiative, has been doing the exact same thing, right? China, they're not the best at coming up with their own ideas, but they're really good at stealing our ideas and doing them on their own. So China has actually taken the exact system that the deep state globalists have used to seize control over countries around the world, and China's doing the exact same thing. So China, what they're doing is they have their Belt and Road Initiative. It's $1 trillion+ initiative where they're going into countries, and they've been targeting Africa and certain areas specifically. They go into a country, and it's the exact same thing that the U.S. has been doing. They go in there and they say, look, China is the new world superpower. We're this massive economy. We're going to build you a new port. We're going to lay down railway. We're going to build highways. We're going to build you a massive infrastructure so that you can be part of China's growth. But you're going to have to sign up, you have to go in the debt for it. So China has been using the exact same method as the US government to seize control over countries. And if you want to look at, and I should have prepared a graphic for you, but if you want to look at the control that China has, look up a graph of the countries that have become part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. You can see how much global control China has. So if you really remove yourself from this, and you're looking at, like, say, at the 100,000-foot view, you can see there's two players playing chess for the world control. And they're going back and forth, they're fighting back and forth, and this is what's playing out right now. Now, unfortunately, for us Americans, we're caught in the middle. And so many other countries are caught in the middle because, as I mentioned, they're not looking out for us. Their goal is to destroy us. It's unfortunate, right? But it is, right? We stand in their way. So China, for instance, they're not bringing tanks and battleships over as we speak. I think there's a very good chance that they will get to that. And if you go watch my interview with Jeff Nyquist about the final war, there are so many indicators that right now China is gearing up for a World War III. Go watch that interview if you haven't yet. I'm not trying to be a fearmonger, but China is ready. China is moving its nation into a wartime state. It's moving into a war economy from a peacetime economy. It is shifting everything into resources to fight what they call the final war. Okay, so this is the important thing, is that what we're seeing with the BRICS nations and the currency, that's part of the war. It's a multi-pronged attack. Bringing jobs from America over into China, part of a war. America, look at World War I, World War II, especially World War II. Look at how our factories played a critical role in being able to support our country at war, or to support our allies at war, producing ammunition, weapons, tanks, etc. We don't have any more factories. We gave them all to China, right? So we've completely weakened ourselves in so many ways. And so this is where we're at. Okay, this is where we're at. Now, as I mentioned, the beautiful thing with all this, and I really am optimistic. I know it's kind of a crazy thing, and it's a crazy place that we find ourselves in, but China is on the verge of collapse. The CCP is on the verge of collapse because it's been fighting this war. Right, it's weakened already. It is waging war against the globalists because there's a saying in China, right? And the saying is roughly, it's one mountain is only big enough for one tiger. Basically, it's like, one mountain is not big enough for two tigers, and that is deeply in the Chinese ideology. They have to be in control, but the globalists who've been laying their plan for a new world order and globalist dominance, they've been doing this for potentially thousands of years, especially centuries. They're not going to cede control to China. And so I think that what we're seeing happen, we will see happen, and really keep an eye out for this. And that's the important part, is as we try to make sense of what's happening in the world, whether it's the Sussman being acquitted, whether it's something happening with lockdowns or the World Health Organization, remind yourself and keep that in the back of your mind is, okay, where's the war happening? Because once you start thinking about that, you can start to see it emerge, and you can see that these two factions are battling themselves. And I really believe in that process that they will collapse. What I think is going to happen personally is I do think that we're going to see the collapse of the dollar. I do think that we're going to see food crisis. These are dominoes that have already been set off. You can't really undo them, unfortunately. They're already set off. Maybe if Trump would have gotten in properly in 2020 and had 4 more years, I don't think that he could have actually averted these things from happening, but he could have slowed them down. He could have given us more time to prepare, which would have been really important. But things didn't play out that way. So I do believe that whether it's the food shortages, the collapse of the dollar, these things are going to happen. That's my personal belief. You can have your own personal belief. And I hope I'm wrong, but I'm also preparing for that. Okay. Now, but if you look at just the globalist plan, their whole idea, their great reset, is to collapse these systems and then to bring in their new systems, their central bank digital currency, their food production systems using blockchain to track everything, tied to your social credit score, et cetera. But what's happening, though, is that as these crises are emerging that will affect the world, the whole world, China and the deep state are both going to be vying to get in control. So China might be moving into more of a kinetic war where they're trying to gain control that way. So you're seeing this fight play out. But I do believe that what will happen is I think China will fall first. The CCP will fall first. But because the globalists have built so many of their plans on the back of the Chinese Communist Party, whether it's through their 5G infrastructure or the number of many other things, that when the CCP falls, so many of the structures that the globalists, the deep state, are also using will also collapse. And at that time, the whole world will see through this. The whole world, we the people, all your friends and family, you've been trying so hard to red pill and expose the truth. People will see through it, and we the people will unite. The hardship that the whole world will be going through amidst this time will bring us together. It truly will. So, hopefully this has been a good episode for you. I saw this happen with the pandemic treaty, and as I saw these things unfold and I looked at why that happened, it just light bulbs went off. So I hope that this has helped connect some dots for you. It certainly has for me. I'm doing my best to research and form an understanding that I can then bring to you and hopefully help you understand what's happening in the world, because there's utter insanity. But I find that when you understand things in the right lens, you can start to make sense of what's happening and prepare for what's happening. Look, folks, I do highly, highly, highly recommend, if you haven't yet, start a garden, go out and buy some rice and beans. We do have some tough times ahead of us. We will make it through, but you can take actions right now that will really, really lessen the hardship that is ahead of you, right? Put some money into precious metals, put some money into land. Just do some things to look after your family. Water is very important. Make sure you have a good water source. Make sure you have a good water filter. I use a Berkey filter. Anything you can find, make sure you have access to that. Collect rainwater, etc. So, also, if you want to support me, obviously being part of Rise TV is a big one, and I'm gonna touch on that in a second here. But please share this video. And not just to support me. Look, I mean, of course, it's like, okay, hey, it helps. Look, if I have a video that everyone shares and it gets a lot of views, it helps because I'm reaching new people, and I believe it's helpful. But fundamentally, I hope that you see that the information I'm giving you helps frame what's happening. And so, if this information has been helpful for you, I hope that you can share it with one of your friends or family and help them open their eyes to what's happening. And look, folks, I genuinely try to speak in a way that I don't want to push away people. I don't want to push away the left. I don't want to push away the more liberal folks. I really try to speak in a way that hopefully they can start to see what's happening. Because I know you know what's happening. You are what they'd call red-pilled. You know what's going on. You know the crisis our country is in. But a lot of our fellow Americans are just drifting along, and they're just, hey, it's back to normal now, and I'm going to go watch the baseball game at the bar, and they're not thinking about these things. So the more we can share this kind of information, it's really important. And lastly, Rise TV. So if you want to really support Rise TV, is the #1 way to do so. So as I showed you at the beginning of the show, I'm going to play the trailer again because a lot of people, they just came on towards the second half of the show. So folks, tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern, we are doing a live watch party premiere over on Rise TV of the first episode of Deep Insight with Man in America. I am extremely excited. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up that trailer for you again. I'm going to show you this trailer, and I'll kind of say my goodbyes afterwards. So again, this is going to be tonight on Rise TV, Deep Insight with Man in America. It's about almost a 40-minute episode, fully produced, high production value. If you want to join us, there is a link in the description below the video for a free trial to Rise TV, right? And if you want to stick around, it's $10 a month. And as you see here, we're going to be producing a ton of content. We've got a huge library. We do live shows. But again, let me go and play this video for you because we're doing a premiere. Join me tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern. So check this out.
How are the Ukrainian oil pipelines, Klaus Schwab's Great Reset, and the so-called New World Order agenda connected? Why did Russia invade Ukraine? Why are megacorporations even interested in Ukraine? What has George Soros been doing in Ukraine since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991? And why did Hunter Biden get paid $50,000 a month to sit on the board of Burisma Holdings, a Ukrainian energy company? These are just some of the questions you've probably wondered about. Ukraine, gas companies, energy, power. This is just the tip of a very large iceberg. All of this and more on Rise TV's newest series, Deep Insight, with Man in America.
All right, folks. Thank you again for joining me for another Man in America live show. I'll be back on Thursday at 2 p.m. Tonight at 7:30 p.m. On Rumble, actually, and on Rise TV. Edge of Wonder. Those guys are going to be digging deep into Spygate and the Sussman trial in Durham. So make sure you catch that. And then again, I will see you tonight at 9 p.m. Make sure you go to the link below, get your account set up and everything ahead of time. But we're going to do a live premiere of Deep Insight with Man in America at 9 p.m. Eastern on Rise TV. Thank you all so much. Go buy some rice and beans or go plant some seeds. And look, folks, we will get through this. We absolutely will. Absolutely will. So thank you all so much. I love you all. Have a wonderful day. I will see you tonight. Take care.